Share. Is this the first, right?
Yes, it is.
If this can disappear, yeah, exactly.
Keep the cursor away from the end.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our lunchtime, post-lunchtime slot in our very interesting study day on the afterlife. And it is a particular pleasure for me to introduce our next speaker, Eileen Gardiner. And if anybody of you have done any research on visions, the afterlife, the other world, or anything, you've had recourse to Eileen's most useful works. You all will know her book, Visions of Heaven and Hell before Dante, and the Medieval Visions of Heaven and Hell, the source book, which is just the most wonderful resource, as well as her invaluable website, Hell Online. She's also she's a woman of many parts who's not just published on visionary texts, but also on pilgrimage. And she published a book on the Pilgrim's Way to St. Patrick's Purgatory. Would you believe she's published 5 volumes on hell in various religious traditions? We're delighted that she's here today with her partner, Ron Musto. Both of them are the co-founders and co-publishers of Italica Press. And she's also the former co-director of ACLS Humanities eBook and the Medieval Academy of America, and co-editor of its journal Speculum. For many years, she was based in New York, but we're delighted that she's now on this side of the pond. And she is currently a research fellow at the University of Bristol. So I'm delighted to introduce Eileen and look forward to what I'm sure is going to be a most stimulating presentation.
Do we need to make Isa co-host before? Can we just, sorry about this. Will you do it? Because I'm sorry.
As long as you do that.
It's just we have to make Isa co-host to let people in. We need to just get out and go back in. Sorry about this.
Yeah.
Get out.
Yeah.
Yeah, stop share.
No.
Yeah, go on to Ice. So go to participants. Perfect. Sorry about the delay. Technology.
I make this disappear. We managed to right. Not sure if
Oh, it goes off, okay. I have to say, it's a great pleasure to be here and meet in the body all of these people that I've been meeting with online for ages. It's also a great pleasure to be in the city where Tyndale fell off his chair. As you can see, I'm going to try and cover this talk in 5 points. And first, I'd like to begin with the vision of Tyndale. The 6th torment of the vision of Tyndale is the house of Christinus. The name is thought to be related to the occupation of bakers, and indeed the house of Christinus is described as very large and as high as a mountain, and in its great magnitude as round as an oven where bread is usually baked. Appropriately, a flame shoots out from it that burns all the souls in hell within 1,000 miles. Tyndale was spared this outside flame, but he was compelled to enter the house from which the flame proceeded. Inside, Tundale encountered rabid dogs. Demons tore him to shreds with an array of instruments, from axes to spades. Instruments they used to flay, behead, split, and mutilate the souls of the damned, throwing the pieces into the fire. The text goes on to describe the further torment of both men and women, religious and lay people, in their genitals, putrid and corrupt, gushing with worms. Under torment, Tundale confessed his guilt, but it's unclear whether he was confessing to an excess of gluttony and an insatiable appetite for food, or to the sins of a sexual nature, or to both. The punishment is labeled as the punishment for gluttons and fornicators. At the conclusion of this hellish torment, Marcus, the author of the Vision of Tundale, describes an extended discussion between Tundale and his guardian angel regarding both grace, gratia, and mercy, misericordia. I've always been struck by how unusual this was in the context of other vision literature, where grace and mercy might be mentioned simply and rarely. Here we come upon what seems to be a theological excursus on the workings of grace and mercy. Elsewhere, Marcus mentions grace just once. In the heavenly realm of the married, Tundale pleads with the angel to allow him to remain there. Lord, if I discover grace in your eyes, allow me to remain in this place. Clearly, this grace, in the sense of favor or goodwill, something established between individuals, is not what he's referring to. Is what he's referring to here. He's not referring to the freely given, unmediated favor defined in the OED. As something received from God by the individual, benevolent divine influence acting upon humanity to impart spiritual enrichment or purity, to inspire virtue, or to give strength to endure trial and resist temptation. This is the grace that will concern us here, grace in its theological meaning. Misericordia, mercy, is a word that appears 24 times in the Vision of Tundale, and the meaning is consistently, again, as defined by the OED, forbearance, compassion, or forgiveness shown by God or a God to sinful humanity or to a particular person or soul. The distinction between the two is no doubt familiar to anyone concerned about these theological points, but just to be clear, the former is a gift to promote the spiritual development of the individual, whereas the latter is meant to ameliorate the spiritual, some difficult current situation. I find that the scholastic and monastic theologians, Marcus, the author of the Vision of Tundale, and Dante all seem in agreement on the definition and use of these terms. Tundale was clearly in need of both misericordia and gratia. Mercy was required to help him navigate the otherworld punishments that he had already merited. Grace would fortify him for his return to this life, where he would need to mend his ways and travel a better path in order to avoid the eternal versions of the pains that he already experienced, and to obtain salvation, joining the ranks of the blessed that he had seen in heaven. The conversation at the end of the Festinus chapter, Torment 6, begins when Tundale is released from this punishment. As we find Dante always questioning his guides in the Commedia, Tundale here, full of sorrow and bitterness, questions his angel. Why, Lord, have I, miserable me, suffered so much and such great torment? And what is it that the wise said to us? The world is full of the mercy of the Lord. Where is this mercy and kindness? Answering him, the angel said, Alas, child, how many less intelligent people does this opinion deceive? For although he may be merciful, God is also just. He renders justice to each one according to his or her merit. We see here the tension set up between justice and mercy, divine justice and divine mercy. The proposition appears to be that justice will be proportional to sin. However, the angel concludes his statement with, he gives great mercy to one judged worthy of punishments. So the proposition is actually that God's justice will be proportional, but that God's mercy can't be calculated. The angel then rather turns the table on Tundale when he tells him that he deserved his great torment. So it was in proportion to his actions, but the fact that he has suffered is actually an act of God's mercy. He says, be thankful when you see that he gave you this torment to you through his mercy. This is a mercy that Tundale does not readily understand. But the angel explains neither justice nor mercy can exist without the other. And this duality is necessary because without the threat of punishment, humankind would have no motivation to be just, restrained, or penitent. God has rightly arranged, according to the angel, to temper justice with mercy and mercy with justice. A more negative assessment of God's mercy was voiced by the devils after their opening encounter with Tundale. They complained, oh, how unjust and cruel God is. Since as he wishes, he mortifies them, and as he wishes, he revives them, not as he promised to give back to each according to his or her merit and work. He frees the souls not free and damns the souls not damned. Back at the Festinus episode, the angel proceeds with a very succinct argument, or theodicy, explaining that people who fail to repent might seem to thrive in this world, but punishment will find them in the next, while the penitent who seem deprived in this world will enjoy their rewards in the next with the angel. Thus, from the perspective of the living, all might not be as it seems in terms of justice and mercy. Then, with a quick nod to the doctrine of original sin, the angel tells Tundale that not even a child 1 day old is free from sin, thereby reinforcing the necessity of divine mercy and definitively distancing himself from any Pelagian heresy, which held that original sin did not taint human nature. Once Tundale gets back his strength, he continues to probe. He asks the angel, since this talk is about justice, why are they led below when they do not deserve to enter the gates of death? According to the angel, this is an act of divine grace, a gift from God, a gift given to both the blessed and the damned, a divinum gratiam. Both are given the opportunity to see the alternative terminus. As a result, the blessed, through divine grace, will burn more ardently in praise and love of their Creator, while the sinners who are fittingly judged for eternal punishments, having seen the rewards which they had voluntarily forsaken, will suffer even more in their torments. Marcus uses the word sponte, meaning voluntarily or of their own free will. This act of God's grace seems to apply to those already dead, so it's not a gift given to the living to aid in their salvation, but something given to the dead to heighten the experience of their eternal destiny, whether that be perdition or salvation. The damned might wonder at what sort of gift this is, but obviously it is not necessarily a good, a boon, but simply something divinely given. The interaction of free will and grace, which is crucial to salvation in the thought of Bernard of Clairvaux, is turned on its head here with the use of free will given before the stated act of grace. Now I'll turn to my second point and look at Bernard of Clairvaux. The question I want to pose is, can we draw a line connecting Marcus and Bernard on this question? We know, or at least it has been long held, as almost certain that Marcus was in the party of St. Malachy traveling from the 1148 Synod of Irish Bishops on Nishpatrick toward Rome. We believe that he was with Malachy at Clairvaux when he died on the 2nd of November, 1148. And we believe that he might have worked with Bernard on Malachy's Vita. So we may have a physical connection between the two. And to answer the question of a connection between the two on the question of grace, mercy, and free will, we can turn to Bernard's not completely worked out thesis in his 1128 Liber de Gratio e Libero Arbitrio. It is an extended consideration of divine grace and free will and the necessary interaction between the two. Before Bernard, Augustine attempted to sort out the workings of divine will excuse me, and human freedom, concluding that the total initiative rested on God, not on humankind. Anselm of Canterbury wrote that because of original sin, the grace of God was required to restore individuals the ability to do good works and to exercise free will. Bernard holds that all initiative must be ascribed to grace, but if no one but God can grant salvation, nothing but free choice can receive it. All efforts to do good would be in vain without God's grace. And in that end, his mercy alone is responsible for saving souls. This would seem to be a mercy that spurs God to grant grace. It is different from the mercy shown to those deserving of hell, but granted salvation. It is a mercy that inspires God to grant grace and the opportunity to freely choose to cooperate with that grace. Shortly before the end of his treatise, Bernard asks, "For what else does what we are saying amount to but," quoting Paul's epistle to Romans 9:16, "so it depends not upon man's will or exertion, but on God's mercy." It is not hard to imagine that Marcus, who will write the Vision of Tyndale shortly after he finally arrives in Regensburg, would take this opportunity to tell his marvelous tale to the monks at Clairvaux. This is exactly what he presumably had done at Regensburg for the Abbess Gisela and the women at the convent of St. Paul. It is not hard to imagine that after telling the story at Clairvaux, Marcus received some instruction on how to introduce some doctrinal rigor into his text. I want to repeat here how unusual it is to discover such a particular concern with mercy and grace in these otherworld visions. Only the apocalypses of St. Peter and St. Paul show any similar concern at all. Turning now to my third topic, Dante. We will look at divine mercy and grace in the Divine Comedy, and in particular, we will focus our attention on Bernard. He holds such a central place in Dante's Paradiso that he's given the final words from that realm. If we turn to the closing section of Canto 31, beginning on line 94, the old man Bernard begins to give Dante his final lesson. He establishes his connection to Mary, whom Dante has just been contemplating, and he uses grace to make this connection. "And the Queen of Heaven, for whom I am all on fire with love, will grant us every grace, ogni grazia, for I am her own true, faithful Bernard." Bernard goes on to refer in line 112 to Dante as child of grace. And at the end of Canto 32, Bernard prepares for his prayer to the Virgin in Canto 33 and prepares Dante for it as well. Let us turn our eyes toward the primal love so that, looking toward him, you may penetrate as far as possible his radiant light. But so that you do not fall back here, thinking to advance by beating your wings, you must gain grace, gratia, through the power of prayer. Grace from her who is able to help you. Before moving on to Bernard's actual prayer, I'd like to emphasize Bernard's point that salvation is not something you yourself can make happen, beating your wings. You must gain grace, and you gain grace through prayer, which is clearly not considered beating your wings. It seems one would be left to assume that virtuous works of mercy, would be included under beating your wings. And this appears to be consistent with Bernard's writing. And Bernard is telling Dante that he must follow Bernard in his devotion to Mary. Alison Cornish introduces Bernard's prayer to the Virgin thus: "On the pilgrim's behalf, Bernard, together with a multitude of the blessed, prays to the Virgin, whose assistance is fundamental to anyone who seeks grace, and grace itself is a means." And shortly into the prayer, we find the key: "Lady so powerful and so great, whoever seeks grace without turning to you, wishes to fly without having wings." Here again, we have another reference to wings, Now, however, rather than the futility of beating one's wings to gain salvation, it's a question of not having wings at all. His wings in Paradiso have been compared to Ulysses' oars in Inferno 26:125. We made wings out of our oars in a wild flight. In his commentary, Nicole Fosca characterizes this verse as reminiscent of Aeneid 3:520, in which the journey, flight enabled by oars that have become almost wings, is retrospectively defined by Ulysses as madness, an excess and exceeding of insurmountable limits and abuse of human means, hubris. Also in the Paradiso, Dante will speak of Ulysses' mad passage, in contrast to his own flight, guided by Beatrice, the pious one who guided the feathers of my wings to such a high flight. Clearly, this attempt to do it on one's own is pure madness, a fruitless effort without grace. Your compassionate aid is not only given to those who ask, but oftentimes also is freely given before being sought. In you is mercy, in you tender pity, in you munificence. This man now begs you through grace to give him the power to rise higher still and with his own eyes ascend to the vision of final salvation. All this will hopefully be accomplished by Bernard's prayer that Mary's own prayers will disperse the mist, reveal the vision to Dante, and afterwards keep his heart pure, watch over him, and vanquish his human impulses. Bernard's prayer to Mary that instigate, hopefully, the workings of grace, and it is Mary's own prayers that have the potential to accomplish this. Mary's prayers are obviously directed at her son, who clearly must be the source of all grace, with Mary as conduit. And finally, in the last grazia of the Commedia, Dante exclaims, "O abundant grace that made me dare to fix my eyes on eternal light." Theologically, this brings up a few questions about grace, mainly about its source and distribution. We've already seen that for Bernard, God is the source of all grace, and there is nothing that humankind can do to influence its distribution. And we must look not only at Bernard on grace, but also on Bonaventure, my fourth topic. Bonaventure clearly is an important source for Dante's thinking. Zachary Hayes provides a definition of Bonaventure's idea of grace, the gift whereby the human person is transformed to true God-likeness, and the soul becomes a similitude of the Trinity. A process referred to here as hierarchizing. According to Hayes's understanding of Bonaventure's theology of the Trinity, the source of all the gifts, including the gift of grace, is the Holy Spirit. Through him, grace descends from the Father. On the other hand, when all the persons of the Trinity are not distinguished from each other, all gifts are through them collectively and equally. The Father confers all gifts through the Son and the Spirit. And yet Dante ascribes the giving of grace to the Son. According to Jacques Guy Bougereau, however, Bonaventure also saw the Son as the source of grace, for he alone, by reason of his human nature, is hierarch in the ecclesiastical and the angelical hierarchies, and by reason of his divine nature is the center of the supercelestial hierarchy of the Church, leading it to seek understanding in the things of faith through the study of theology. My fifth topic is Mary and the role that she plays in the distribution of grace. She is clearly not the source of grace, but apparently can appeal for grace in the name of one who petitions her. This is in direct contradiction to the clear principle that there is nothing one can do to influence the dispensation of grace. It is a gift given freely by God. It's difficult to square this with Mary's position as the go-between in the economy of grace. We cannot merit grace by petitioning the right saint, even a saint that Dante seems to enfold within the Trinity. As Brianne Reynolds writes, it is as if Dante wants to insert Mary as a fourth element in that Trinity. However, George Dameron writes, salvation was possible only through the reception of God's healing grace made accessible through the sacraments, which were administered by the clergy. It's hard to identify the source of Dante's ideas on grace, the action of spiritual power and intercession. Although both Bernard and Bonaventure are willing to attribute a special place to Mary as the mother of God, nowhere do we find a basis for her intervention in the distribution of grace. Well, according to Brian Patrick Maguire, Bernard makes Christ more accessible through his mother. Andrea Robilio believes that Dante's thinking is closer to the thought of monastic theologians such as Richard St. Victor, for whom theology is fundamentally a discipline of prayer aimed to purify the living and dispose them to obtain from God the grace of mystical contemplation. This seems to indicate that while one can do nothing to merit or seek grace, prayer will prepare the individual to cooperate with it if it is bestowed. Robilio goes on to explain that purification is a condition required to obtain grace, even though grace does not respond to any human merit or attempt. In conclusion, the Tundale author, a cleric, may have had direct access to Bernard's teaching, and while Dante, a layman, certainly expands on the theology of grace as found in the Vision of Tundale, he does so in a way that does not appear to follow any accepted theological thought. I would propose that rather than reading Augustine, Anselm, or Aquinas, Bernard, or Bonaventure, Dante may have been informed on his ideas on grace by something else, perhaps by preachers and sermon literature. Clearly, however, this would also benefit from further study. Thank you.
Okay, the way these things are organized is I think we're going to have discussion and questions for all three speakers at the end of the three-speaker panel. So I'll introduce Nicole then now. So again, it's a great pleasure for us to have Nicole back in Cork. She was one of the De Finibus team between 2009, I think, and 2012, something like that. Anyway, we used to have great fun together, myself, Emma, and Nicole, and John. And we were, I must say, both Emma and Nicole were a wonderful support to me at that time. And I look back on those years very fondly. But she's now moved on to greater things. She went from us to the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies, and then to a funded research position in Erlangen, and then she moved back to Ireland and came to TCD, where she is now a research assistant professor in the Department of History and principal investigator on a very interesting project, which is co-funded by the Science Foundation Ireland and the IRC, called Early Irish Hands, the Development of Writing in Early Ireland. But she has kept her hand in, with eschatology, and works as well on martyrologies, transmissions of books of texts, and all sorts of interesting things. And today she's going to speak to us about understanding sin and salvation in the Visio Tundale and the Tractatus de Purgatatio Sancti Patrici. God, that's hard to say. Off you go, Nicole.
Thank you so much. And let me just say how wonderful it is. Oh, yes, she's the just good to be back in Cork in the home of De Finibus and you all, and such a glorious day like this as well. I also want to thank the organisers, of course, for making that possible and allowing me to speak here as part of this wonderful study day and to explore maybe a slightly different angle to my earlier work on medieval visionary literature. So those of you who were here for De Finibus and or have read my dissertation may know my approach then was guided largely by a more or less retrospective view of the development of the genre, concluding with the two visionary accounts concerning the Knights Tundale and St. Patrick's Purgatory. So in this paper, I've taken the opportunity to revisit somewhat these two 12th century texts and take another look at them in the context of looking ahead towards Dante's illustrious and perhaps in some ways epitomous Commedia. I'm not, of course, a Dante scholar, so my aim here is not actually to analyze the Commedia so much as to look again at the Visio and the Tractatus with a view to exploring some potential parallels with the Commedia and situate these within the genre. So while not wishing to distract in any way from Dante's immense work and extraordinary creativity, numerous parallels, as we have seen this morning already, could indeed be drawn between the guiding structure of the Commedia and earlier medieval, rather than classical, visionary accounts, in particular so in the Visios Noctali. So among such features would be the multi-layered metaphorical representation of heaven and hell, the use of liminal periods, guides and mediators, and characters familiar to the protagonist, and also the notion of healing or contrapasso that we heard this morning, as well as an active role in transformation of the protagonist himself in this experience. I will touch on a number of these aspects today, but within the constraints I set for this paper, however, I will limit myself to a discussion of features which illustrate one guiding theme, that of understanding. Specifically here, I am interested in the formation of understanding of the ontology of the hereafter as generated by the respective authors through their narrative composition and the employment of literary devices. So from this perspective, key devices which contribute to meaning making in vision text, but these texts in particular also include the metaphorical and moralistic organization of the landscape, the protagonist's experience within that, and the use of guides and familiars to steer, explain, or otherwise shape understanding of sin and salvation in the protagonist. And obviously, by extension, also in the reader. Taken together, these aspects represent a highly individualized and sensory approach to explaining the relationship between sin and salvation through visionary narrative. Despite the fact, obviously, that each text has a very different take on the visionary experience. As such, both in their own way could be said to anticipate Dante's own deeply personal approach in the Commedia, but we'll leave that for the discussion. So we've discussed these two texts briefly already, so I'm just going to give a very quick summary for those of you who may not actually know one or the other. The Visios Noctali has been introduced a number of times already. It was written by Marcus of Reichenborg around the year 1149, and essentially Noctal finds himself outside of the body. He meets his guardian angel who takes him to see the rewards of the wicked and the blessed. And in doing so, they proceed through a stratified landscape containing at first scenes of punishment, followed by the pit with the Prince of Darkness. Then they ascend upwards, visiting a succession of pleasant abodes separated by walls until they reach the heavenly host. Noctal is then allowed to contemplate all existence, more or less. Finally, he is greeted by Saints Rudon, Patrick, and other bishops, and told that he must return and mend his ways. And upon waking, he donates his belongings and preaches the word of God. In the Tractatus, we have a very different sort of experience. It's written by H.F. Saltrey around the years 1180-84, and this narrative opens with a prologue offering a theoretical framework as well as several shorter anecdotes, setting the scene with the frame tale concerning St. Patrick, who was asked, as we heard before, by some pagans to show them the torments of the wicked. So Jesus then shows him a pit that will purge any truly repentant sinner, and Patrick proceeds to build a church there. As far as the story goes, we are introduced to the knight Owen, who wishes to enter the purgatory to purge his sins. Owen prepares himself with prayer, and upon entering then, finally, he is greeted by 15 monks offering instructions before being dragged away by devils through a number of torments and south through the entrance to hell. Each time, he escapes his torment by invoking the name of Jesus Christ as instructed. Next, he crosses a bridge where he is met by 2 archbishops and shown the earthly paradise. And finally, after tasting the heavenly food, he is sent back and cautioned to lead a holy life. Upon his return, he decides to wear the sign of the cross. He travels to Jerusalem. When he comes back, he becomes an interpreter for Gilbert of Louth, whose testimony then forms the basis for the text. The narrative then further concludes with anecdotes and an epilogue. And of course, not unimportant is that the context of this text differs from some of the others in that it is associated very specifically with a place in Ireland, namely Station Island in Lough Derg, which served as a place of pilgrimage between the 12th and the 15th centuries until the Pope closed it in 1497. So returning to the question of literary structures, beginning with landscape, ontology, and meaning making. One of the key aspects, of course, inescapably, through which visionary texts communicate the ontology of the hereafter, is this stratified delimitation of the afterworld through various divisions in the landscape. Typically, these include heaven, hell, and a range of in-between areas, as we have seen, which may be further specified as areas for just or unjust. While the concept of such interim spaces as a defined place, referred to as a purgatorium, only really begins to crystallize in the mid-12th century, such in-between areas did often contain elements of purgation in earlier texts also. In general, the increasing fascination with the question of the fate of the not so quite perfect souls in the afterlife between sort of late antiquity and the high Middle Ages drives the development of thinking in both theology on the one hand and the visionary genre on the other. However, when we arrive at the Second Council of Lyon, what is specified about purgatory is only that souls are cleansed after death by a purgatorial purifying punishments. Dante, on the other hand, imagines purgatory very vividly as a defined place, and thereby, in a way, epitomizes development which had been steadily developing in the medieval visionary genre. As geographical features come to play an increasingly prominent role in visionary narratives, their complexity also becomes increasingly rich. So by the 12th century, when we have the Visio Nodali, physical structures such as walls, chasms, doors, bridges, ascents and descents, which we find in the text, serve to refine what is really in the genre an evolving eschatological hierarchy. The Visio Nodali, which was a bestseller in its own right, is a key witness to the growing popularity of these ideas. And so in the text, as I'm discussing it today, this landscape the interaction of the protagonist with the eschatological landscape also intensifies, certainly in comparison with other earlier exemplars of the genre in which the visionary tends to take on a more passive role, as John noted earlier. In their own way, the authors of each respective text then sought to explain their understanding of post-mortem purgation through the creation of a multi-layered hellscape. In the Visio, Snugdal's journey begins with a tour of the unpleasant regions. Here the journey consists of a gradual descent down towards the pit of hell, where the Prince of Darkness lives. Here there is not yet an explicit purgatory, but there are various areas where purgation is possible. Since the Pontfarcy's study of the structure of the text, the terms upper and lower hell have become more or less household names. Yet only the term infernus inferior actually has a basis in the text. The preceding areas are referred to with the adjective superius and are not explicitly referred to as a hell at all. Having reached the full depths of the Prince of Darkness's lair, the journey resumes an upward trajectory towards the heavenly host. The eschatological space, therefore, is outlined with a complex geographical arrangement, which is exploited to explain differences between separate categories of souls depending on their sins or virtues. Thus, behind the wall of silver are the faithful spouses, and behind the wall of gold, the martyrs and the chaste. In spatial terms, it is the interim, really, that I'm interested in. The interim encompasses, at the very least, in this text, everything from the first high wall, which is located between the lower hell and the heavenly planes, to the wall of gold. At the first wall, on the side facing the lower hell, Snugdal finds men and women enduring wind, rain, sadness, hunger, and thirst, but they are in the light and out of the stench of darkness. This location is described in the text as a turning point. The angel informs us that these are the mali non baldo. They will suffer here for a number of years before they will be brought to the requiem bonum. Thus, it would seem that these souls are able to move on to a better place after paying their debt. On the other side of this same wall is the Campus Letizia, a beautiful, fragrant, flowery meadow where the sun does not set and which holds the fountain of life. We are told that this is the resting place for the boni non valde. These have been saved from the pains of hell, but they do not yet merit to join the saints. If the interim is to understood all souls whose sins may be purged, however, it also arguably includes what is referred to as the upper hell, to which Snooknell passes first. When the text switches from the upper hell to the descent into the lower hell, the angel reveals to Snookdal that all the people you have seen before are expecting the judgment of God, but from here, those who are in the lower parts have already been judged. Past the gates of death is only Mos Perpetua. The two areas are just separated by a descent and differentiated by the state of judgment of the souls in them. Read in this way, the entire area referred to as upper hell functions as an area of purgation and shares a central theme with Dante's Commedia. It organizes the area of purgation primarily with reference to mortal sins, not altogether actually, like one might find in the penitential handbook. Snooknell's journey to the upper hell takes him in order to the punishments of murderers, treacherous, the proud, avaricious, thieves, gluttons and fornicators, fornicating religious and immoderate folk, and finally those who accumulate sins. There is no actual strict correlation, however, between the order of sins and their location in the upper hell, nor is there a strict division between the types of sins mentioned in the upper and lower hell. Rather, the distinction concerns the severity of the sin perpetrated. As Marcus writes at the end of paragraph 7, the overriding concept of sin and atonement in this text is the notion that the Lord will punish and give mercy according to his will. Now, turning to the Tractatus, we have a very different text at our hands. While it draws a very significant amount of imagery from the visionary genre, certainly where it concerns the punishments, it does not purport to be a visionary account so much as an account of a subterranean pilgrimage. Its geographical areas, therefore, much less defined, and much greater emphasis is placed on Owain's steadfastness in his devotion. And this is what ultimately allows him to complete his trial safely. In some ways, and this might be for someone to unpack in a different paper, it reminds me a little bit of the role of Beatrice of Dante. As far as the geographical divisions go, the text does not refer to the valleys of punishment as hell, which is set apart completely from these areas. Owain is in fact made to believe that he has reached the entrance of hell when he reaches a well belching flames. Hell is said to lie beneath a burning river full of demons. It is conceived of as a place reserved for those who will not be purified, but will perish forever. Having successfully made it through a series of punishments, Owain's subsequent crossing of the bridge, to the frustration of the devils, represents a personal victory as well as a division between the areas of punishment and paradise. The Tractatus also breaks in a significant way with other visionary journeys, in that it is normally set in this world, as we've heard. While the author makes a programmatic statement in the introduction advocating belief in a purgatorial punishment after death, in the text, Jesus tells Owain that any penitent and faithful person entering a pit will be purged. They will also see the torments of the wicked and the joys of the blessed, but these are two separate actions, so to speak. In addition, in the vision itself, the archbishops explain to Owain that penance received before death at one's deathbed, which has not been atoned for in life, must be repaid through suffering torture in these places of punishment. All those who are being punished will eventually be saved in the end and will come to the place of rest after being purified. From the outset, then, the text purports to speak of a true purgatory. What's more, the soul's inhabitation of this location is not temporary by virtue of having to wait for, say, the collective release of the Day of Judgment, as in many other visions, but it is temporary, standing in direct relation to the amount of guilt that one needs to atone for. What is omitted in this text is any explicit reference to the sins of which the souls encountered are guilty, and any sense of a relationship between these sins and punishments. I would suggest, however, that this is deliberate in that the author effectively subverts the reader's expectations, certainly coming from having read other visionary tales, by drawing attention away from the eschatological landscape in order to focus on Owain's personal journey of devotion and purgation and on the need for penance in this life, which is ultimately the topic of the Archbishop's address to him in paradise. For both texts, however, the experience of the eschatological landscape is a key aspect of their journey. In this context, it should be observed that the momentous judgments of doomsday, or the personal judgment sometimes encountered in Journey of the Soul narratives, have made way for what is effectively a protracted testing and measuring, and ultimately paved the way for a purgatorial space of gradual purification. In both of these texts, the experience of the protagonist takes a central role. And at this point, I would like to take a closer look at that dimension. A feature shared between these texts is that Snugdal and Owain are submitted to torture more than once during their visit, though Owain is in fact usually able to escape almost immediately. That is, they experience the purgative punishments firsthand, which is something not usually seen in earlier examples of this genre. This aspect of the narrative corresponds with the role of the protagonist as a figure with whom the reader is meant to empathize, and through whom the reader may experience a glimpse of the afterlife in turn. This stands in sharp contrast to early medieval visions and apocalypses, in which it is more common for the visionary to be a religious person or even a prophet. Snugdal here represents an average sinner. He is accused of causing scandal, arrogance, adultery, and other vices, very vaguely sort of described, and being in general a filius mortis, or child of death. He is surprised and shocked at finding himself in the hereafter, just like anyone might be when surprised by death without the possibility to atone first. Ultimately, this situation reinforces the urgency of doing penance for unatoned sins, which is the central message here. Fittingly then, given the context, Snugdal's sensory experiences are paired with particularly emotive expressions as he moves through the upper hell. His fear and despair become increasingly worse as he descends. He is overcome by fear, by cold, stench, and darkness, and anguish until he is so overwhelmed that he cannot speak or move, such is his terror by the time he reaches the Prince of Darkness. His anguish reaches its peak there in the lower hell, especially when the angel leaves him momentarily and he is left tearing his cheeks and lamenting. Snugdal's increasingly desperate state here is symbolic of the progression of his descent and expresses the expected reaction to being in those parts of the afterworld. He becomes, in fact, increasingly like the devils, ruled by anger and by fear in the absence of God and the angel. Naturally, his experience changes once he enters the place of moderate punishment, and he, in fact, expresses wonder at the sudden change. His joy increases again as he gets closer to the Most High. Here, his emotional experiences reflect in a very direct manner the nature of the landscape through which he passes, and the reader is encouraged to experience it vicariously. The resulting outcome, namely that he devotes himself to God upon his return, is likewise exemplifying the expected reaction in the reader. In the Tractatus, on the other hand, Owain is forewarned, as his confrontation is in fact his motivation. This confrontation is his motivation for undertaking the pilgrimage in the first place. His initial reaction to the torments is not dissimilar, though the focus of his experience is the constant testing of his steadfastness. Only on occasion is he said to really feel fear or pain. By contrast, his reaction to receiving the heavenly food is described as one of extreme bliss. Owain completes his purgation and likewise changes his life for the better upon his return. In a different way, then, he in effect becomes a model for penance, though as an alternative, his visit to purgatory was likewise considered to set an example, and consequently, Patrick's Purgatory in Lochderg became a popular place of pilgrimage during the centuries after the text was written. By extension, then, each of the protagonists serve as exemplars to the reader, who is meant to learn from their experiences in turn. Finally, a third device through which understanding is communicated in these texts is the use of other characters, and in particular here, the use of guides and what I call familiars. Like in the Commedia, a number of characters appear in these roles, adding further layers of symbolic meaning. The figure of the guide or mediator, which for Snoepdal is his guardian angel, typically serves not only as a navigator to the afterworld, but also seeks to help the protagonist understand the fate of the soul in the hereafter. And this usually happens through explanation and sometimes exhortation. For instance, short exhortations appear in the Visio Snoepdali in the form of the angel's pleas to Snoepdal not to repeat his former trespasses. The angel also reminds Snoepdal not only of knowledge he possesses before his vision commenced, but also of knowledge gained during his journey. On occasion, this function is exploited to include brief lectures. For instance, in paragraph 7, the angel explains to Snoepdal that there are different punishments for petty or great crimes of theft, unless the petty theft is a sacrilege, or unless it is committed by one in orders, again, reminiscent in a way of penitential handbooks. The concept of sacrilege itself is also explained here. In paragraph 13, in the lowest part of the hell, where the Prince of Darkness resides, the angel lectures about the misuse of power. As a matter of interest, his guardian angel also explains that there is a matching guardian devil, though this figure does not appear to play any great role. In the Tractatus, significantly, the author reinvents this function and allocates it to different characters. In the first half, the devils are his guides in a manner of speaking. They drag him from one place of torture to the next, and even take him by the hand to help him onto this bridge. Of course, they do this expecting him to fall off the bridge, which doesn't happen. Owain, in turn, refuses all engagement with the devils and repeatedly invokes Jesus Christ, who serves as his defender and his guide on a spiritual level. Through this contrast, the devils and Jesus Christ stand for unfate and fates in the text, or paths of damnation and salvation, respectively. The explanatory function has in turn been allocated to the 15 advisors at the start of the text and the Archbishop's own encounters at the end, thereby also cleverly signaling the important role of the clergy as guardians to the soul in this life, as well as perhaps the role of the clergy at Loch Derg as guardians of purgatory specifically. The most significant role in this is reserved for the archbishops he encounters in paradise. They reveal to him where he is, and explain also the story of Adam and original sin to him. They explain the need to atone after death, if it's not done while alive, and also that it is possible for souls to rise to paradise after purification, and again from there to higher joy. Though no one knows how long they must stay in a certain place, the length of time, again, is determined by the severity of their sins. A similar role is played by the characters called familiars, which are typically figures known to the protagonist from his own life or from history, and whose appearance therefore carries a symbolic meaning either for the visionary or for the reader. And this feature Dante is also known for. In the Visio, we have a plethora of familiars who stand out conspicuously in the narrative. We have St. Rudan, St. Patrick, the Irish bishops Celestine of Armagh, Malachi of Armagh, Christianus of Louth and Emmaus of Cloyne, the three kings, Donogh and Cormac and Conchobar, and also the ancient heroes Fergus and Connell, who were on the lovely poster that has been created for the studio today. As the Pomfrey has already discussed, St. Rudan and the three kings all have particular ties to Munster and therefore embed a secondary, perhaps political motivation in the narrative. St. Rudan was the patron saint of Lora, a Nord Munster church, and was believed to descend from the same family, the Owenachte, from which the Irish kings Donogh and Cormac descended. His function in the tale, in fact, really seems merely to establish himself as patron and perhaps to claim Snoepdal's burial rights, which may point to a personal or political connection to this monastery. Though there is nothing to prevent the suggestion that Snookdal had a personal connection to Laura and the burial of nobility on the monastery lands was quite common, the monastery does not appear to have played a significant political role in the exploits of the Clan Gaeltacht, even in the 11th and 12th centuries. It has been suggested then that it is rather Marcus who had a connection to Laura, or that the target audience was in this region. In fact, we're dealing with a meta-text level here. It is in addition possible that St. Rudan's appearance is rather due to the fact that this monster saint was also venerated in the Benedictine Schottenbuster, and thus creates a strong connection in the text between those two localities. However, Marcus also uses these canes to illustrate the workings of the afterlife. In paragraph 16, the scene in which Snookdal sees Congobar and Donge together on friendly terms, to his great surprise, since they were rivals in life, becomes the perfect example of God's mercy and his willingness to forgive even such violent men. In addition, he portrays heaven as a place where there is, unlike on earth, no discord and where even foes can live in harmony. King Cormac, who is given a prominent place in paragraph 17 and who is in reality a generous church benefactor, is here rewarded for his generosity in almsgiving. But Marcus is careful to point out that the Lord is both just and merciful and thus rewards and punishes as he sees fit. This is illustrated in Cormac's temporary punishment for adultery and murder in the church sanctuary. The same sins are, according to the Montfarcy, attributed to Connell and Fergus on the poster, placed in the superior hell between the teeth of the beast Acheron, who appears to function similarly. While Connell and Fergus are said to have been faithful in their time to the belief of their people, they are nevertheless not forgiven for the sins of murder and adultery. The Montfarcy has rightly suggested that Marcus just illustrates that God is just towards both Christians and non-Christians, but I think he simultaneously draws on the topic of concern for ancestors. The message that ancestors who are non-Christian may still have some redeemable qualities is an important one historically, even if by the 12th century we can no longer speak of a society in the progress of conversion. So to conclude, while there could be plenty more to unpack here that time does not allow for at present, I hope that I have managed to highlight the important role of these three aspects in the text in generating understanding of the afterlife in both the protagonist and by extension in the text audience. In addition, the significant personal appeal apparent in these two texts to the sensory experiences of visionaries and through the insertion of historically relevant familiars is something that perhaps echoes with scholars of Dante as well. And I look forward to further exploring such parallels in the discussions later today. Margaret.
Okay, so we can turn now to our last speaker of the day. So definitely this is a case of last but not least, because you all know Elsina. Anybody who's here has been dealing with her, especially the speakers, and her very, very efficient way of organizing everything. We owe a great deal to her, and this day would not have certainly not have happened without her. So she's a Government of Ireland PhD scholar, Department of Italian here in UCC. Her research project is entitled Mirabilis Visio, Dante's Commedia and Irish Vision Literature, and her supervisor is Dara O'Connell. Before that, she did her BA and MA in the University of Bologna in Italy. So she's been a great addition to the medieval community in UCC here since she arrived, and regularly attends talks in various areas, and we're delighted to have her here with us in UCC. And today she's going to speak to us about wounds of penitence and purgation in Dante and visionary literature. That's you. Thank you.
Sorry, I just need to take the PowerPoint because it just disappeared.
I think you opened the PDF, did you open that?
Did I? Oh, yeah.
It's just an admission. Yeah, go, do you want to maybe just go back into the folder, the yellow folder?
I'm not sure. I can.
Yes, you there.
Is it? It's not this.
Is it slides or PDF you have?
It's PDF, but
Oh, yeah.
slides. I would like to put on the screen, maybe desktop here.
There we go.
Yeah, but I need to share it, sorry. Ah,
It's so pretty.
sorry about that.
First thing I think we need to, let's just, like,
Ask.
yeah, it's, hold on, it's 2 seconds. There we go.
Maybe Zoom.
It's just a minute. So I want to close this one out.
Yeah.
It's blocking, see when you want to put that on the thing,
No, it's Kate's already here. Go to Zoom
okay,
and here and share.
let's just go to this side. And this, can't believe I'm the
Here.
go-to person when it comes to technology,
Yeah.
something is awry.
Share. Here, this. Yeah,
This
here, yeah. But from slide 1. Ah, okay.
Yeah,
Grazie mille. Thanks so much. Hopefully this will disappear as well. Okay, so hello everybody. So the presence of wounds is one of the many pieces of evidence of the controversial and sometimes explicitly contradictory treatment of corporeality of shades in Dante's Commedia. As it is known, in Purgatorio 25, through the voice of the poet Statius, Dante gives a clear explanation on the actual status of the shades in the afterlife. In this canto, he illustrates the creation of the human soul, and how, at the moment of death, the soul's transformative power is able to create an aerial body, which allows the soul to speak, to express emotion, thoughts, and, most importantly, to suffer physical torments. It is known that the problem of how disembodied souls could suffer infernal or purgatorial torments was widely discussed by Christian theologians, and certainly Dante was well aware of this debate. As Manuele Graniolati has widely demonstrated, Dante's embryology in Purgatorio 25 draws both from Albert the Great and Thomas Aquinas' ideas on the formation of the human soul, combining the doctrines of both plurality and unicity of forms in an original and unprecedented way. That said, it is important to notice that Statius' doctrinal discourse on the aerial body takes place very late in the poem. Regarding reading the text, it's easy to notice that before this explanation, and especially in Inferno, Dante's treatment of soul's corporeality floats between declarations of inconsistency and episodes of physical interactions between the pilgrim and the souls. Here, for example, there are a couple of declarations of the inconsistency of the soul. All empty shades except in seeming, for example, in Purgatorio 3. In a few words, Dante's treatment of shades corporeality is studied with contradictions and inconsistencies. Here we have a couple of examples of physical interaction between Dante the Pilgrim and the soul, especially in Inferno, very violent interactions. It is likely that Dante inherited the idea of representing the dead souls as inconsistent entities from Virgil's Aeneid. it is well known that the influence that the Virgilian chthonic imagery exerted on the Comedia's earliest cantos is very strong. So the declaration of vanity of the shades in the third circle of Hell, for example, in Inferno 6, might be led back to the Virgilian influence. However, as we continue reading the poem, episodes of physical interaction between the pilgrim and the shades become more and more frequent, and we can say even the standard. The fact that the pilgrim can touch and even harm the shades is in stark contrast with the Virgilian representation of the underworld. Here, the shades are represented as light and inconsistent entities, and Aeneas, despite being a living visitor, as Dante, cannot physically interact with them. As the Sibyl warns him, he would uselessly attempt to strike the shades with his sword, just as he vainly attempts to touch Creusa and Anchises in the two famous episodes of the Triple Hoax. Considering this very concrete and material understanding of disembodied souls, I think that more consideration should be given to the influence that popular imagery about the afterlife, and especially visionary texts, had on the treatment of corporeality, on Dante's treatment of corporeality, especially in the first part of his poem. In my presentation today, I will particularly focus on the representation of wounds in the Commedia, investigating on its possible relationship with the context, the wider context of visionary literature. The presence of wounds particularly bears witness to an idea of afterlife closely related to the bodily dimension. And I believe that investigating its various declinations might provide us with a further understanding of the relationship between the body, soul, and different otherworldly spaces as depicted in Dante's Commedia and in visionary literature. So first of all, I will carry out a general survey on the presence and function of wounds in the Commedia. Then I will focus on two specific cases in Purgatorio, in which wounds take a strong symbolic and metaphorical meaning. And finally, I will try to draw some parallels with these kinds of wounds and specific visionary texts. In an article published in 2013, Marianna Villa investigates the vocabulary used by Dante to describe different kinds of wounds in the Commedia. And she points out three terms: ferite, rotture, piaghe. Villa notices that while wounds in Inferno are to be intended as literal wounds, references in Purgatorio and Paradiso tend to have metaphorical and metapoetic meaning and function. Something that Villa leaves implicit in her analysis, not specify or investigate, is that this kind of distinction is systematic in Dante's use of the term piaga, piaghe, which might be translated as sores or wounds without the issue of blood. As Luigi Blasucci notices in the Encyclopedia Dantesca, the use of the term piaga in the first canticle always has a literal meaning, while in the second and the third canticles, the symbolic and metaphorical meaning is dominant, even when related to actual wounds. More in general, the terms, as I mentioned, seems to be referred to wounds that do not imply blood issuing from them. And in Italian, it is also the term generally used to refer to Christ's holy wounds. As you can see here in the slide, references to piaghe in Inferno always refer to wounds inflicted on sinners with a punitive function. Considering Purgatorio and Paradiso, piaga is used with a metaphorical function to mean, for example, torment, sin, civil disorder, or in Paradiso 32, for example, the last example, to mean original sin healed by the Virgin Mary and by extension by the sacrifice of her child, Jesus Christ. However, there are two specific cases where the term is used with reference to actual wounds, despite bearing a strong symbolic and metaphorical meaning. I am referring to Manfred wounds in Purgatorio 3 and to the 7 P's inscribed on Dante the Pilgrim's forehead at the gates of Purgatory. John Freccero notices how Manfred wounds serve a deeper purpose than Dante's desire to hold up a mirror to reality. In fact, the wounds are an anomaly in the representation, a flaw that seems to undermine the basis of Dante's fiction. Wounds are inexplicable on such bodies because they seem to be accidental intrusion into the ideal corporeity of the afterlife, and so they demand an interpretation. Now, to understand the extraordinary symbolic meaning of Manfred's wounds, I believe it is important to draw a parallel with another encounter of the pilgrim in Inferno, which is the encounter with the prophet Mohammed in the Sowers of Discord's Bolgia in Inferno 28. Manfred's episode, indeed, I believe reiterates the narrative structure of Inferno 28. Sorry, the count is 28, not 31. However, it changes the metaphorical implication. In Inferno 28, a devil inflicts deep cuts on the sinner's bodies using a sword. The poet especially puts a strong emphasis on Mohammed's punishment and on the way he showcases his wound, as you can see in the picture as well. Mohammed explains that those who cause the division in their life are now literally divided. Before their circular path ends up again in front of the devil, thinner wounds are sealed. So the devil can inflict again his punishment using the edge of the sword. Dante puts a special emphasis on Mohammed showcasing his wounds. The prophet invites Dante to look at him while opening up his chest in a very emphatical gesture. So he looked at me and with his hands ripped apart his chest, saying, "See how I rend myself, see how mangled is Mohammed." With a similar but much less tragic emphasis on word and gesture, Manfred introduces himself to the pilgrim in Purgatorio 3. As it is known, Manfred, the illegitimate son of the Emperor Frederick II and regent of Sicily, was excommunicated twice by 2 different popes for political reasons and died in the Battle of Benevento. Despite being excommunicated, Dante places him among the saved souls in Purgatorio. At their encounter in Antipurgatory, Manfred draws the pilgrim's attention on a wound that he has on his chest. Again, the soul literally showcases his wound. Mostrommi, una piaga sommo il petto. And invites the pilgrim to look at him and to recognize him using the same word used by Mohammed, or vedi. The contrastive reading of these 2 episodes seems to confirm the distinction that Villa makes between 2 kinds of literal wounds which can be found in the Commedia. Drawing on the Thomistic idea that the sin as a rupture of the pact with God, the first kind of wound is considered as a visual representation of this rupture, an imago agens of the emptiness and division that the punishment must fill in. Indeed, infernal wounds generally impact on the integrity of the bodies and provoke the release, and I quote Villa here, of the inner man, the blood, the humors, and even the entrails. The other kind, which is defined by Villa as the heroic vulnus, is, and I translate her words here, a sign of the violence suffered and is imprinted on the skin, often without breaking the unity of the body and rather leaving a scar with a memorial and often identity function, a sign of virtue or sanctity willingly shown and in imitation of the Christus patience model. So clearly, Manfred wounds have to be intended in this latter sense. The fact that we are not dealing with a simply mimetic representation of bodily wounds in the case of Manfred can be demonstrated considering the fact that Dante variates the bodily area on which, according to historical chronicles, the king was mortally wounded. Indeed, I believe that it is not only for reasons of decorum, as Giorgio Inglese points out in his commentary, that Dante displaces Manfred's wounds from his groin to his chest. Displacing the wound on Manfred's chest Dante underlines the salvific value of this mortal sign, whose presence persists even in an eternal dimension. In other words, Manfred's wounds are clearly charged with an intentional Christological value. It is indeed at the moment of this violent death that Manfred repents from his former sins and turns to God's mercy. Poscia. So after my body was riven by 2 mortal blows, I turned in tears to him who freely pardons. So Poscia, after death, underlines how mortal wounds finally brought Manfred to turn to God, sincerely repented, crying and seeking forgiveness. These wounds, which break the unity of his body, create the space for his redemption. And Dante intentionally puts them in parallel with the wounds inflicted on the side of Jesus' chest, from which the redemptive blood and water was released, and it being considered like the symbol of the reconciliation of humanity with God. In Paradiso, Dante refers to the salvific and redemptive power of Christ's chest wound in these terms: in quel che forato dalla lancia, e prima e poscia tanto soddisfece, che ogni colpa vince la bilancia, so pierced by the spear. It is interesting to notice that Manfred specifies that his wounds were provoked by 2 punte mortali, so 2 wounds inflicted with the point of the weapon. This detail again stresses the parallel with the wound on Christ's side provoked by the Roman soldier Longinus, using the point of the spear according to the Gospel of John. There is another soul in the group of the late repentant that Dante encounters in the Antipurgatory, who makes reference to a mortal wound which was salvific to him. It is Buonconte da Montefeltro, a Florentine knight, which tells the pilgrim about the last moments of his life in Purgatorio 5. Buonconte died in the Battle of Campaldino, however, his body was never found. In this canto, he finally explains to Dante how, forato nella gola, wounded in throat, he fled on foot, dripping blood across the plain of Campaldino. Again, a violent death, and specifically a mortal wound, is what induced Buonconte to finally turn his soul to the Virgin Mary and ultimately to save his soul, despite being at the very end of his life. Nel nome di Maria Finivi, I ended up on the name of Mary. This idea of wounds having a salvific and redemptive function is also implied in the other reference to an actual piaga, which can be found in Purgatorio. I am referring to the episode of the ritual of stigmatization which precedes Dante's entrance into Purgatory, described in Purgatorio 9. Here, Dante and Virgil encounter the gatekeeper of Purgatory, who is described as an ash-colored dressed angel holding a drawn sword in his hand. Before entering the gates, the angel traces 7 P's on the pilgrim's forehead. With the point of his sword, he traced 7 P's upon my forehead and said, "Once you're inside, see that you wash away these wounds." Again, here, wounds having a salvific value are inflicted with the point of the sword. As the angel specifies, Dante has to wash and heal his wounds while ascending the mountain. And further on, Virgil specifies that these wounds are to be healed by being dolente, by being painful, so through purgative sorrow. It is evident that biblical references to signs impressed on foreheads are a fundamental model for the stigmatization of the 7 P's. Commentators generally mention the tau inscribed on the foreheads of the merciful, which will be saved from God's revenge in Ezekiel 9:4, or to the sign which will be impressed on God's servant's forehead, according to the Apocalypse of John. Bellomo and Carrai also mention the Psalms, "Remove a me plagam tuam," despite the fact that this is a more general reference to punitive scourges than a specific reference to physical wounds, as it is the case for Dante's P's, 7 P's. Commentators also point out the ritual of purification mentioned in the second book of the Kings, and which is a reference to the need of washing the body in the River Jordan 7 times to be purified from mortal and physical corruption. However, considering the representation of actual wounds specifically signifying the sin, but also having a purgative function, I believe that much has to be said about the poem's affinities with previous visual literature. The text presenting more affinities with Dante's episode is Envisioning the Afterlife. However, it is interesting to see how the idea of wounds inflicted on the body of the visionary with a penitential, purgative, and sometimes testimonial value is used several times in visionary texts. So going back to Dante's 7 Ps, meaning peccata according to the majority of commentators, I still need to mention that as Dante passes from one terrace of purgatory to another, the Ps on his forehead are erased by the touch of the angel, which guards the terrace. And the ritual is described in this passage. So he brought us where the rock was cleft, there tapped my forehead with his wings, and then there is the description in the following passage of Dante touching his forehead and not finding anymore one of the Ps, because it's been healed by the angel. In Envisioning the Afterlife, we find an episode where the infliction and healing of wounds on the visionary's body follows a similar dynamic. I'm referring to the episode of Knutdal's crossing the bridge, already mentioned many times today. As a penitence for his sin of robbery, Knutdal must pass over another narrow bridge burdened with a cow that he had stolen. The bridge is covered with iron nails that pierce his feet. Crossing the narrow bridge causes him much tribulation because of the nails and the cow's encumbrance. Meanwhile, the knight is forced to stop as he encounters another soul coming from the opposite way, and both can neither turn back nor turn around. This painful waiting is even more emphasized by the image of the running blood coming from the wounded feet, which soiled the bridge. At this point, Knutdal's guardian angel intervenes and brings Knutdal away. Pointing to his feet, he reminds him of his past life and invites him to remember how quick his feet were to shed blood. Therefore, the angel makes clear that torment is manifested on the part of the body involved in the sin. In this case, the feet, with a reference to the flight that followed the crime. Finally, as it is in Dante's case, a touch of the guardian angel heals them, and the knight and his guide can continue on their way. From this episode, we notice not only how clear and precise is the principle of correspondence between the part of the body involved in punishment and the sin committed, but also how the wound and then the healing power of the angel have a purgative function, which allow the visionary to continue its purgative path. We also notice how it is especially the wound that makes visible Knutdal's sin and allows his purification. In this sense, what has been recently argued by Anne Leon in her last monograph dedicated to Dante's blood is valid also for Envisioning the Afterlife, in the sense that blood confirms its polysemious agency and its liminal character. Its exit from Knutdal's body has the function of revealing the crime, showing therefore its confessional and revelatory power. At the same time, the wound and the blood spilling out of it clearly hold a penitential role, which is functional to the purgation and the remission of sins. A similar function and meaning of wounds on the visionary body is also clearly pointed out in another important text, in another important vision contained in the earliest biography of the Irish Saint Fursa. During the second of his visions, Fursa has just met 2 bishops who invest him with the mission of preaching penitence to the Irish princes and priests. After this prophetic investiture, including the order of not accepting gifts from sinners, lest suffering the pain of their fire, Perseus redescends on earth, accompanied by 3 angels. During this descent, the saint is hit by a sinner who comes out of a big fire. From the fire leaped out a man whom the demons hurled onto his shoulder, striking his jaw with his own jaw. He recognized him because he had given him his garment when he was about to die. he burned his shoulder and jaw. And then the angel said, "What you have kindled has now burnt you. If you had not accepted the garments of this man who died in sin, neither would his punishment burn your body." So again, as in Visio Nogdali, the wound here has a revelatory function, as it shows first there was sin, or error in this case, as a sign which is visible on his body. At the same time, the wound has a penitential function, and for this reason, it needs to be washed. As soon as Perseus' soul comes back to earth, he needs to wash his body. And we might recall here the angel words to Dante. Once you are inside, see that you wash away his wounds. Perseus' wounds also have an important testimonial value. They testify the truthfulness of the bishop's warnings, and more in general, they work as a seal of veracity of Perseus' vision. Indeed, as soon as the visionary comes back to life and his body is washed, the burnings appear on his shoulder and face. It is interesting to notice how the author himself is aware of the extraordinariness of this phenomenon, as he concludes, "Extraordinary how in flesh was manifested what only his soul had suffered." Another important visionary text from the 12th century, two important, Visio Puntelmi and Visio Descalchi, includes episodes where the visionaries are physically hit or wounded in the context of the visionary experience. In the first text, wounds are related to the prohibition of communicating the vision to the community, and in the second, they are related to the visionary testimonial role as well. Descalcus, indeed, is very proud of showing his wounds to the community as a tangible sign of his extraordinary experience. In conclusion, the passage and so the permeability between the other world dimension and earthly life in vision literature is quite often marked by wounds, which seem to have a peculiar liminal function and dimension. As it is the case of Manfred in Dante's Purgatorio, the persistence of wounds and bodily signs beyond the terrestrial or the earthly or the ecstatic experience, which has caused them, underlines the permeability between these two dimensions. But above all, it witnesses of an experience of pain and salvation, which reiterates the model of Christ's own suffering. The fact that these signs remain impressed and visible on the body confirms the veracity of the salvific account, while also constituting a visual evidence which is possible to showcase for the benefit of all the Christian community. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, as we did in our first discussion session, I think I'm supposed to invite the three speakers from the session to sit up here and take any questions from the assembled sages. Yes. So we just ask Dara and Elsina. We were supposed to have 45 minutes for this discussion session, but we're running a good bit over late.
But naturally,
Let's go.
you yourself didn't need to have them up if you're not aware.
No, that's not it. It's just that.
Pass over chair responsibilities.
No, I'm just thinking of people with transport commitments, but yeah, I'll let the discussion run naturally. So I will kick off the discussion perhaps, and I have a question first for Eileen. I was fascinated by this Marian element, and this, as you said yourself, Bernard Clairvaux is often accused of wanting to create a fourth person of the Trinity. And this development, the idea of grace, and I was thinking that whole Cistercian context of development of a whole Marian liturgy, and new prayers such as the Salve Regina and all that kind of thing. And I was wondering if the the echoes of what you're picking out, quite interesting points you're making as the development of that imagery in the Visio Totali. Was there any places where you were able to sort of match it up to discussions of grace in the wider Cistercian community at the time, or is it mainly in Bernard's own writings?
I actually had only an opportunity to look at it in terms of Bernard's writing. And as I said, I'm not actually too sure how much, it's an early work of his, and I'm not too sure how much he's actually gotten something that. One of the things that was interesting on the hero poem was a lot of the actual Bernard Mary stuff post-dates his life by quite a bit. The whole lactation miracle is actually something that's associated with another monk at Clairvaux, and it gets put onto Bernard, and it's about 100 years after Bernard's death that this happens. What the connection that I'm seeing actually with the Mary thing is very much sort of a Franciscan thing that's happening in 12th, 13th, 14th century Italy with the Madonna della Misericordia. And this whole notion of Mary's functioning in the scroll. So I'm not quite sure, although it's obvious that Bernard has this particular interest. I'm not sure that that's what Dante is speaking about.
No, interesting. That's fascinating. As you see the wider context of a growing strength in Marian devotion, not just simply in Cistercian communities, but Franciscan, all sorts across Europe at the time. Oh, fascinating, fascinating. Yes.
Two thoughts really just this idea of Mary as intermediary, where is this development, and is it like John Thought and the Wedding Feast of Cana, where she acts as intermediary to change the water to get Jesus to make the wine? Is that maybe kind of a starting point for her to have more kind of agency or different kind of function in these devotion practices, especially in relation to prayers?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it is related to this notion of sort of humanizing the Trinity by introducing her as sort of as something more approachable. And I think that may be how it's working in this context, because I think the idea of, well, certainly the Holy Spirit is beyond anybody's realm of understanding. And I think the sense that that Mary can be seen as someone with a relationship to humans through her sort of participation in Christ's life, and when she's been the intermediary, bringing him into this. I think that's the way it's probably working. But I don't see a lot of particular work done on this yet. So I'm really curious.
Yes, that's why I asked the question. It's obvious there's quite a lot to be done. It's fascinating. Yes.
Yeah, I had a question on this point of Mary. I thought too that was very interesting, and I was a double question. The first is about the visionary literature. If there is in the visionary text before Dante, Mary with the concept of grace. I don't think so, but there is not, because I remember the episode of Saint Paul and Michael, the angel, the archangel, that the sinners in hell ask them to introduce their prayer to God for the mercy in the vision of Saint Paul in the episode of and since that the Michael archangel is the one who is the intermediator between the hell and God in that text, and that is because he is the evidence from the Apocalypse of John. Is his role is one in that text, and then in Dante is Mary's one, and so you answered that there is not.
Well, actually, the one that I can think of, there are two apocalypses of Mary. The Greek one and the Ethiopian one. And in one of them, not sure which one it is now, or it may in fact appear in both of them. She does act as intermediary. And she makes an appeal to Christ, who relieves the people in hell of their punishment one day a week or something like that.
I was thinking about something like that because if I remember correctly, that Ethiopic Apocalypse of the Virgin is like a rewriting of the Apocalypse of Paul, but with the Virgin. And so probably, I don't know, probably it's very far from Dante anyway. And instead, about Dante's reception, I was thinking even about all the cathedrals with the Mary's name in that period. The Florentine cathedral that was built when Dante was there is dedicated to the city, Mary, Mother of God, and Santa Maria del Fiore, and with the flower that comes from Mary is God itself, is Christ itself. And so in the probably even these images can be linked to the things, this stuff. I don't know if you have already thought about them.
I haven't had a chance to look at it that closely, but so the Misericordia images start showing up. I think it's around 1300 that we know of, because of course a lot of these things have not survived, so it's really fun to know. So I do think there's a lot to be done there. I think that it is very interesting that all of these churches are showing up with primarily associated with, which obviously becomes a really powerful these period. And it's amazing to see how much she's incorporated into the Vermont country, as opposed to earlier, Northern European vision.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point you made there, and Philippa made a similar point about the importance of looking at the slightly non-canonical material and the apocrypha and stuff. I think, John, earlier on, did you mention Dormition legend?
What?
Yeah.
The Dormition legend, I don't know, that is in Italian. When the Dormition legend. These, what's it, does anyone know what she goes to sleep? Well, she doesn't, she goes up to, it's called Dormition legend, but I think it's Ascension legend, really, isn't it? And the infancy legends about the Virgin Mary and the Christ child, where she's given a far more important role, as you said, in some of the apocryphal texts. She's got a much more intercessionary role, and as the kind of the Marian devotion grows in parallel, I suppose, to the concept of grace being developed, it's a natural thing to look to Ave Maria Grazia Plena. If you're talking about this grace, she's full of grace, she might be able to spread it around. So yeah, it's a natural extension. And all those Marian hymns, there's explosion of Marian hymns at the same time as explosion of churches with Mary mentioned, mentioned to her. So you want to expand on the Marian point?
I was just also going to mention that it was also came as a bit of a surprise to me that Bernard is so opposed to the concept of the Immaculate Conception.
Yes, it is very strange. Yes, because his devotion to Mary is unquestionable. There's a famous story. He's supposed to faint with delight after the first time he heard the Salve, the Hail Holy Queen being sung, and he thinks it's so beautiful he faints. Yes,
he draws the line.
He draws the line. Yeah, and it's to do with this. He doesn't like the idea of the Immaculate Conception for some reason. John.
Just something for Elsina. As you can imagine, I greatly appreciate your going into so much more detail, some things which I will touch on very superficially. Very well. Towards the end of your talk, you're talking about the testimonial value of these spiritual rulings. I was wondering if that can be tied back to the Christological point that we were making earlier. Because I was struck by the fact that in both the Mantra passage and the Mahomet passage, the phrase "or baby," and of course, besides being sort of an instrument of redemption, wound in Christ's side was a sign that the one who came back was the one who had died. That's what he asked Thomas to put his hand in when he came back. So there too, I think it's logical.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was thinking of like the idea of the ostentatio, I don't know how it's in English, like the showcasing of the wound and the Thomas evidence. That's what you, we're trying to, definitely, that's probably, it's one of the architects a bit of the both episodes. Probably, I would say that, Mohammed episode is a bit of parody, so probably there is a bit of an idea of giving a same representation, but with opposed values, so negative values. Also, I was thinking also the idea of the fact that their wounds are sealed back again before they come again in front of the devil that cuts with his sword. Looks a bit like a healing, which is not like a proper healing, because there is this circular dynamics which repeats the sin and the punishment. So there is no progression of it as it is in the vertical structure of purgatory, but remains in circles. Like,
I suppose there'd be elements of that in some of the torments in the Aeneid, which of course would have been one of Dante's sources.
yes, the
Tedious, for instance.
but there is no purgation. Well, yeah. Yeah, in the end, it's the idea is that like physical traces, right, are what is purged through these different kind of torments, with the idea of purifying, not the soul from material parts. So I think there is an idea at a certain point of freeing the soul from these traces, while in Inferno it's constantly a very material punishment that is revealed on the body, which is it's always
Regeneration is part of the torment. Which again, I think is the case with some of the figures of Tartarus already emerging.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ron and then Dara.
Thanks. Also for Elsina, a much more typical variation on John's question. Wound as both warning and as evidence in Trecento communal legislation. So throughout the city-states of Dante's time, for example, research of Andrea Zorzi on punishment and the very physical manifestation of punishment on the bodies of miscreants. I wonder if that was also a larger context for Dante's.
Sorry, you said the context in Florentine,
in Roman, Neapolitan, throughout the Italian peninsula, the legislation of punishment upon the miscreant's body with signs of whatever the crime was, mutilation of fingers, of other body parts, etc., as a sign to the public of the sin, but not only of the experience of the sin, but as a warning, as a moral warning.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Yeah, I never like studied in that a bit the legislation related to physical like mutilations and but I think it's definitely there was a punitive like culture, like the legislation like included of course like physical punishment and the correspondence between the part of the body which was part of the scene, part of the crime, and then the punishment, which is something that comes up maybe even in dictionary literature. There are physical punishment which correspond to the part of the body that is punished. I know about the commedia, something that I have a feeling that Dante is creating a bit more of a metaphorical sense, a second layer to his punishments. For example, in the case of the thieves, which are transformed into snakes, and snakes that are transformed into sinners, and that again, it's more of a metaphorical concept of the theft of identity than the usual idea of, I don't know, cutting the end, or a literal like punishment of the body for the crime. But yeah, definitely there should be some connections which should be explored.
Yeah, Andreas Ortz's research might be helpful in that regard. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much.
Dara.
Yeah, I was just saying the same point that I was talking about with regard to Manfred, and there is a political dimension on this because, and John's very right to bring up the slot, showing the rules and the witnessing the rules is very important. But there's a political element to it because he wasn't buried properly, and his body was desecrated by his enemies. Despite the fact that he was excommunicated twice, Dante is making the point that he can do this. Bodies need to be buried. So that's one aspect. But there is another movement, if you like, on Manfred that is less common to and it's one more of disfigurement. And again, it's curious as to why Dante has it there, because he sets it all up in kind of, almost in quote terms, says, beyond the way a value of 18 expected to be wonderful and who's young and beautiful and all of this. And to de-expect man who cope with the teacher, he uses a slash across the face. And this is an act of disfigurement. I wonder, do you have any thoughts on this first slashing, this disfigurement of the face, before you get to the chest? Yeah.
Thanks so much. Yeah, as I said, probably if you start to interpret the Christological side, you should, yeah. That, I don't know, it's just a thought, but I never did some proper study of that. But the idea that Manfred's identity was, in a way, like was attacked in the fact that he was, as you said, his body was not buried, he was excommunicated and yeah, exactly. It was maybe this might be it might be a symbol of what the church and the institution has tried to disfigure amidst the identity of Manfred and assign remains of things, but
it is interesting. I'm sorry for this when he says, when he reveals who he is, he says, so he then and this is just Dante, this is somebody smiling. He said, io son Manfred. He said like he's something to fix these rules, or what they did to his destiny bodies because he's a late attendant. And so again, it's a very strong political element to Dante's story.
About this, I was thinking about the wounds. It's another moment which these wounds are cited in Dante is even the tale of Saint Francis in Paradise 11 when you see this dignitaries, where Dante says probably that Cristo is l'ultimo suicidio. There is Christ, and I don't know, probably can be another phase of this of the same thing of the roots. Of course, there the roots are in the body of Francis alive, not in the body in the other life. But the sense is the same because the stigmatus is the sign of wounds of Christ in the body of the saint. So it's like the same of your action.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yes, definitely. I think it's all very much connected. All this idea of, especially of wounds, not like implying, as we were saying, the issue of blood. The stigma that is assigned remains as a trait which is not impacting that much the integrity of the body, as it's the case for infernal cults and infernal punishments, but remains there and becomes part of the identity of the saint, in this case, as a sign that was directly impressed by God, and it has a testimonial value again of the sanctity of St. Francis. So yes, I think that this is part a bit of the net of wounds and metaphorical meaning of wounds, especially in Purgatorio and Paradiso, which takes a very different meaning than in Inferno. So yeah. Yeah.
John.
I think the contribution for Nicole, thanks so much for that really very rich and many-sided presentation. I think especially of the Lord and other things you've heard today are reminding us what a treasure trove easy to think out it is, how many things we're finding. And one thing which you brought up for me that I haven't considered before, the Mali on Valde seemed to me that might be the part of the Visio which is closest to part of the visual development. Because there too, there's one group of souls who aren't allowed into the land comes the saints here. And they're just sort of off in bogs and on hills and being rained on and so on. But eventually they'll be getting. And that I think it's this idea of the bad weather and hardship in the afterlife. But perhaps it's not a coincidence, it's the Irish text that we're having. But I haven't really heard that elsewhere. I think it's always puzzling that so much of what's in the Visio think is difficult to relate to vernacular Irish vision of picture. But I think is one aspect which can be.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that's a good point. That weather isn't really, it's kind of stand out against all the usually it's ice or fire, like from one way or another. But I think another thing that always struck me between the two is that there's quite this emphasis on what one can and cannot see and achieve, like we were talking about earlier with the earlier text, and the stratification of the walls and institutionality in a way. I also kind of see that in the Alakman a little bit, where there's also this emphasis on, you can get up to a certain point, you can see something, but if you're not, qualified enough or if you're simple, then you can't see beyond that. And the closer you get to the thrones, the more you can actually see. I think that's just one of these themes that seems to be continuing on from earlier texts all the way up through and this so yeah, the weather might just be an Irish thing. I'm not aware of too many other examples of complaints of rain and
I have 4 little notes, mostly similarities with other visions for Elsina. And one aspect we have to highlight relating to Nicole's paper on Coleman, that visions have a huge political force, that this is maybe the only literary genre which writer can openly judge a king, clergy, and all the elite of the country. And this very strong weapon of the literature which Dante will use. And it's interesting that I mentioned that Hungarian Latin vision, which was a partly failure, and but it became, as a story, became very popular in Hungary later, centuries later. And they rewrote the stories, its stories, and it became political criticism against that king, Sigismundus, because the poet, after 200 years, and the episode, writing about the king who is battling with his own sister in hell, which obviously didn't see this visionary because he didn't even enter in the hell department. And another thing on the rounds in the same text, I mean the vision, the writing of the vision, that it's very uniquely attached to the meditation on Christ's rounds. However, the visionary is a layman who, but he got a huge round on his nose, defending his king in a battle. And that's why he got as a present this possibility to have 3 years out of office, going to Spain and to the St. Patrick's Purgatory. And as I mentioned, he didn't fast for 15 days, but only for 5 days. But he says he did that 5 days because of the 5 pounds of Christ. And for him, this will be the only demonstration of any religious feeling, this meditation of Christ's round. And sorry, I have little things also, that it's very difficult that when a visionary, after witnessing a vision, has to demonstrate to the public that this happened. And the vow is a very explicit sign. But others, for example, Mohammed in the Scandinavian, and Turkey has to explain everything over and over to different publics. And it needs rhetorical capacity, which is more difficult than Caponetti. And one thing I thought about the legislation. I don't know the specific legislation of this airport, but I read Nicole's book on prisons, and it opens with the very detailed description of execution, which was open to the crowd. And the man who is executed committed only one crime and has multiple charges. And Foucault, and I think he is not right in this, he said that only from the 18th century onwards will be one specific punishment for one specific sin. I don't think he is right.
Like that city as a place of punishment, this resonates very strongly.
Thank you.
So I asked to the last kind of, I think if Nathan Martin part, we recently suggested that the punishments that we find in the earlier apocalypses drive exactly from Roman punishments of the time where they were written, and that's how they got there, and then got, you know, passed on basically, became literally from there, but they originated in exactly that in Roman time.
Lots of hangings.
Yeah.
On that cheerful note. We'll bring this to a close. I think it was a very, very fruitful day. I loved the cross-pollination between Dante scholars and Celticists and medieval scholars and everything else. It was really, really fascinating. I'd just like to thank Esther and Elsina and Dara for bringing us all together today.
Thank you, Katrina. I was going to say a few closing words, and thank you, Katrina, for expertly chairing that really excellent, wonderful session with Eileen, Nicole, and one of our co-organizers, Elsina. For me personally, it's been a really great pleasure on a whole variety of different levels. One of the things, after a couple of years slogging away in the isolation of the Italian department, when I eventually got off the department corridor and started mingling with colleagues in other departments, I spent some time with the French, a lot of time with the Spanish. But it was really when I started chatting to the odd people downstairs in the early and medieval Irish department that I realized, oh, what a lovely bunch of people they are. And I do genuinely mean that. I mean, despite the fact that like Emma is one of my best friends, and it was actually Emma who introduced me to Simon Marmion's wonderful illustrations of the Visio Tructard. She gave it to me as a birthday present one year, and you know, it really, really struck me. But above and beyond that, there it is. Yeah, that's the book. You know, I think it speaks to the kind of generosity of spirit and friendship, but also intellectual generosity that, you know, the four main members of that department have been here all day. Kevin, silently taking notes, not doing his email. John, Emma, and Katrina, and I really want to thank our colleagues in early and medieval Irish, because there is something quite unique about them as a collective and also individually, but as a collective because there is a genuine interest in scholarship and the right type of scholarship. So please join me in thanking them. It's wonderful to do things together and to have an excuse to do things together. And that excuse really came about because of two people that I want to thank in particular. Yes, of course, my colleagues with the Centre for Dante Studies in Ireland here, the CDSI, they support everything, and also the PhD community in the Department of Italian, who are again here in numbers. I'm really delighted that, for example, Filippo and Esther were able to come from so far and to share their ideas with us. It's been really magnificent to hear both of you talk about such interesting work. And it's been a genuine pleasure to have Nicole back. I barely knew Nicole back in the day, but I always talk so fondly about her in the department downstairs. So it's great to have her here, and that was a wonderful paper. They were all wonderful papers, and they really were brilliant. But we're here because of two people. And you know, we talked a little bit about the senior people and the junior people. We had our senior, I mean senior in a good way, senior scholars, and John and Eileen, who shared their brilliant knowledge with us, and Ron's contributions, of course, a question. But we're here because of two people who were at the early stage of their career, and that is Elsina, who not only co-organized but gave a paper as well. And I the two of them came up with this idea. They came up with the idea of bringing people together in the spirit of dialogue, collaboration, and shared experiences. And I do genuinely think that there was a lot that came out of it today. And I hope you realize, those of you who are on the ground floor of the Errata building, why Dante is a superior poet. And you do. Someone had to say that. But I just want to publicly thank Elsina and Isa for putting together a wonderful day. Thank you.
Actually, all of this was possible to us because somebody brought together the Dante people in UCC, and that was, of course, members of the Center for Dante Studies, but especially Dara, who I think it's quite rare to have at this stage, maybe of our career, the possibility of organizing such events that like give us so much and at this early stage. And so, well, we really want to thank you for all your support and help, and for giving us like genuine, like, I don't know how to say, so the support in every possible sense, not only material, but also like emotional support and every kind of support that can be given.
I learned a new skill today.
And thanks so much for sharing and for participating to everybody. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I need to stop the recording before I continue what I'm about to say. Where is the recording? It should be there. Stop recording.